Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today we're continuing our ongoing coverage of the war between the Russian Federation and the Ukraine. Now, today we're starting again in the vicinity of the Pokrovsk Bulge. I've gone back to August 19th, where you, the viewer, can see exactly what has happened over the course of the last several days. And what you'll notice is that the Russians are now pivoting to the south, widening the Pokrovsk Bulge. So here we go. We are moving forward in time. So again, very methodical drive. Additionally, to the south, the situation in the fortified zone of Vuhledar has become incredibly precarious for Ukrainian troops. We've discussed how this is a very robust and fortified area for Ukrainian forces that right now is in jeopardy of being encircled by Russian forces. Now, specifically, if we look at this area to the northeast of Vuhledar, and we look at this town here, and you see this road junction running east to west and then north to south, the south part running obviously towards the vicinity of Vuhledar. Now if we go back several days, you can see exactly what has transpired in this area as well. So this is a very broad spectrum Russian offensive operation that is taking place. So we're now essentially at the start of August. At the start of August, the Ukrainians controlled these routes into Vuhledar. And then if we fast forward to where we're at now, you can clearly see what has happened. This very methodical Russian advance, which initially severed the roadway here, the Russians seized control of it. And then finally where we're at currently. So, very difficult situation for Ukrainian troops in and around Vuhledar. The Ukrainians are going to have to make the decision on whether they want to maintain their combat elements in that city, continuing to fight Russian forces and risk the possibility of being completely encircled by Russian troops. And it does appear that could be the Russian goal at this point. Now, elsewhere, we are seeing the Russians now assaulting the city of Toretsk. Russian infantry and special operations forces, have broken into the city. They are now using small teams of very capable light infantry units to infiltrate deeper and deeper into the city of Toretsk, conducting house-to-house operations against Ukrainian forces. And these methods have proved very successful in the elimination of Ukrainian forces in other towns along the front lines. Again, these are not large Russian maneuver units. These are small assault formations of platoon and company-sized Russian formations that are breaking into these major towns and cities, conducting very aggressive house-to-house, in some case room-to-room engagements against Ukrainian forces. Now, at the same time, the Russian forces are using its air power, its heavy artillery to smash the rear areas of Ukrainian forces, attempting to continue to supply and reinforce Ukrainian forces in this town of Toretsk. And essentially, this offensive, this Russian offensive, known as, again, the Donbass offensive, extends along the entire front of the eastern area of operations. That is just to the east of Zaporizhia, running along the what would be the borders of Donetsk, Luhansk, and these other areas approaching near the Russian Belgorod Oblast. This area here. And we anticipate that we will continue to see this very methodical drive by Russian forces. It's questionable whether the Russians will attempt to actually break into Pokrovsk or settle in just to the east of the city, start to shell and make the Ukrainians incapable of supplying its forces in Pokrovsk, and then seeking the capitulation of that town, of that city of Pokrovsk, this vital transportation hub. Look, if the Russians are able to gain fire control over Pokrovsk, if they are able to move enough artillery into the region and prevent any kind of Ukrainian movement in and around Pokrovsk, they have essentially captured the city. They will then be preventing the Ukrainians from moving forces both to the north, to the south, and then ultimately those forces, those Ukrainian forces in Pokrovsk, will simply die. They will not have the means to supply themselves. It will become increasingly a very difficult situation for those forces. Additionally, over the past 48 hours, we have seen more major Russian both airstrikes, missile strikes, Iskander ballistic missile strikes targeting Ukrainian military assets in Kharkiv and Ukrainian assets in the capital itself, in Kiev. So we don't know what military units were struck in Kiev. We know that the Russians were going after military units. Even the Ukrainians have reported very few civilian casualties, which leads us to believe that there was a successful strike by Russian forces against Ukrainian forces in Kiev, in both Kiev and Kharkiv. So that's where we sit for today. We're continuing to watch the situation as well in the Kursk incursion. For all intents and purposes, the Russians have effectively created blocking formations within the vicinity of the Kursk incursion. The Ukrainians are not able to continue to move forward. When the Ukrainians are not able to stay mobile in this area, the Russians are able to bring in their GLONASS guided bombs and start to wreak havoc among Ukrainian forces, and that's exactly what's happened. When the Ukrainians were mobile and they were able to maneuver in Kursk Oblast, they were more effective at reducing casualties, albeit they were taking casualties, but not as bad as the casualties that they are taking now, since they've decided to start to dig in. And once they go stationary and start to dig in, the Russians can see exactly where these forces are, and they start to pound the living hell out of those Ukrainian forces. So that's where we're at for today. More to come as we continue to cover the war, as we continue to cover the conflict. As always, thank you for joining us. Have a good day.